hate the term agent. It's not a personal term, and I don't think it should ever really touch consumers.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Bit by Bit. We are the Creative Strategies team. I am Ben Bajarin, joined by Carolina Milanesi and Max Weinbach, and we are here at WWDC 2026, just like we were last year at this same event doing our podcast. So we thought we'd just go through the top level takes and then talk about some of the little nuggets and insights from both conversations and some of the meetings that we've had here. So let's start with you, Carolina. What were your hot level takes from the keynote today?
I don't know if they're hot, but
They're always hot.
lukewarm by now. It's been a long day. I think what not surprised me, but what pleased me was how level-headed the announcements were, meaning that there wasn't hype, there wasn't over-promising. It was very much matter of fact, here's what we can do now. Even the demo, it was interesting to follow on X, Twitter, how many people were actually commenting on the demos being slow, meaning it didn't feel fake. It felt real, even if it was recorded because it was a video. So I'm actually happy that because the pressure was on improving, that we have Apple Intelligence and Siri AI now ready to deliver a meaningful experience, that we got that instead of big promises and big showcases of things that at the end of the day, consumers are still not asking for.
Yeah. What was your take, Max?
I love the Siri stuff, but I think the core functionality and the performance optimizations across the board are probably a slightly bigger deal because it fixes and improves a lot of just the core functionality of every platform, the iPhone itself. If your phone doesn't overheat, feels faster, even 6-year-old iPhones actually feeling fast and getting CPU scheduler improvements. That's a huge deal for the majority of the customer base, even if they don't have the latest iPhones, when a lot of what we probably care about with the AI stuff is only on 15 Pro and up. So it might just have been a quick part of the beginning, but I think it broadly matters far more to the current consumer base. Maybe not in the future, but just a little bit more important to consumers today.
What was your?
And I think the main, we always step back and kind of look at how does Apple tell, the story, right? Because there's a lot of framing and intentionality on how you release new products, talk about new products, and in this case, talk about new platforms. I think it was relatively subtle, but the way the keynote moved from, performance upgrades, so what are we talking about at the system level, like you talked about, right? Which I do think people have griped about, but it's, not the end of the world, but something that does improve, everybody's going to notice that, right? Whether they use any of the new features or not, it's going to be better. It's more reliable. And I think that built to the safety and the privacy and the trust. And I think those two things are subtly fundamental to Apple Intelligence because they built the framework, right? It's got to work well. So you pointed out, it's not just the CPU scheduler that needs to run these things more efficiently in a way that might be more automated, right, or assistant driven, right, with something like Siri, or something where the index, right? You want better search. I think most people's default, do I really love this, is going to be, can I search for things, right? Context. That's just a base level interesting part of Apple Intelligence. But they needed to redo the index, right, to do that. And then you get, to the Apple Intelligence part, and we heard kind of this theme over and over again. Siri was rebuilt from the ground up. Apple Intelligence was re-architected. And in some degrees, it's interesting to view this as there was a lot of new re-architecting, I guess, kind of going on right behind the scenes without a complete break of chain from past cycles. The platform moved forward, but the platform had to kind of be rebuilt, right, in subtle ways. And I think there was a lot of that under the hood that was super interesting. And then just on the Apple Intelligence side, again, coming back to the framing point, it's always interesting to see the reason that Apple's slow, I think people kind of, to adopt these things, I think people kind of miss this, right, is because they have such a large, customer base, right? Young, old, early adopter, late adopter, like you can't bring things to that large of a base that spans that many consumer demographics with something that breaks, doesn't work, might hallucinate, right? All of the things that just needed to have box checks before everybody could use it, right, on equal footing. Go ahead.
Which is why I think they decided, we were talking about it last year, because it's the first time that they articulated how they wanted intelligence to really permeate through the experience of the devices, right? And this year is still the same. You still are seeing Apple Intelligence pop up in a way that is very natural. We are all being trained now to look at Dynamic Island for something. So it's going to be easy for consumers to go and click on it and then open up an interaction with Apple Intelligence. But then on top of that, you have Siri now has a home. So you kind of go and find consumers where they feel comfortable, because consumers that have been playing with AI, they have been trained to having a window, right, where they go and see their chats, and they can go and so that's where they're probably going to go and find Siri in an app. Other consumers that maybe are not as accustomed to using AI might discover AI through whatever app they're in, whether it is Mail or the camera app. And I think that's the beauty of this kind of double way of reaching people where they actually are, instead of trying and training them in something that doesn't feel natural.
Yeah, no, agreed. And that's why I think the loose term, right? I tweeted about this, but like my framework is, Apple's bringing this to market in a way that's like applied AI, and that's a technical term. It's very much to like when robotics moved out from the lab and started finding its way into mainstream applications, they called it applied robotics, and very similarly, this is applied AI, right? Brought to everybody in meaningful ways. And I think what, just a host of conversations I had with, some of the press afterwards too, is people just trying to understand like, well, how do I think about it? Is it an agent? Is it an assistant? And I think the point is actually that you, the customer, shouldn't care about any of those things. You just want to get something done. Add this to my task list. Tell me about this image, right? And so the fact that it's invisible, I think, is actually the Apple part of this, right? The way that Apple brings things to market.
Yeah, I hate the term agent, but a lot of these things were just,
That's why I looked at you.
It was always meant to be an assistant. It was always meant to answer questions for you or do something really quickly. The idea of agents, I feel that is going to be a very popular enterprise term, and it makes sense. It is a little less personal. It's not it's just not. It's not a personal term, and I don't think it should ever really touch consumer because of that. But you don't really have to think about, well, what am I going to ask Siri a question for? I was just briefly asking, what time should I leave Apple Park if I have to go stop by my hotel to go grab my luggage before going to the airport? And it just answers that. And that's not something you'd really think to go to an agent to do. Maybe that's something you do with ChatGPT, but ChatGPT might not have that type of context because it doesn't have all my accounts.
It's just know where you are. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just when you start adding up all these things, it's not necessarily an agent. It's more of an assistant, and I think assistant's still the best term you could ever use for this style of AI. But the enterprise and all of the large companies pushing these narratives, which they need to do, that's where the money is going to be to afford the build out for everything ever for these AI. But they push agents so hard that it kind of forced its way into consumer when it shouldn't have.
And I think this is like the second year we've sort of hit on this, like, what could it be if Apple, is this the year, right? And so, but it always stemmed from, you need to have system level integration for these things. Like, that's the bottom line. It has to be built into the operating system, and only Apple could do that, right? In the same way that if Google does this really well, continually on Android, only Google can do that, right? Or the way that Microsoft does this Windows. Those are the only companies that can build these things into the operating level. And so that was always the hope. Like, we know they've got the things they need to just do this right, but it's got to get to that point where, they can bring it. And so that's where I think, like I said, it feels kind of invisible. You don't need to think like I'm using AI or you're just, what do you want to do, right? What's the job you want done? Is that take a picture, edit a picture? Is that check my email, find, what did Max say 2 weeks ago about where I should go to eat? Like whatever, like that's going to be useful. But to you, you may not be like, I'm using an agent or an assistant. It's just usefulness, right? Useful AI built into the system and the apps.
But I think that Apple and consumer Gemini have a similar, or consumer Google, I should say, have a similar opportunity that others don't have, which is that their value is either on the hardware side for Apple or on the application side for Google. So, search or maps or YouTube or whatever it is. And that takes away a lot of the pressure of necessarily having to have the AI itself rise up, because that for Claude and ChatGPT, like if you don't see them, you don't see the value. And
Right.
that's not the case for Apple and Google, right? Is the value can just come through by a better experience with the device or the app that you're using. And I think that allows you more flexibility in how you go about delivering the AI experience to consumers.
I think one of the things I like that Apple and Google have been doing extremely well is they're not trying to sell you a product that is for your agent. They're selling you, the consumer, the person spending the money, the product that happens to have intelligent features on it.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's ever going to go out of their way to go buy a computer specifically for an agent to go run on and try to optimize it for that at the consumer level. OpenClaw did that, but we're now starting to see Mac Minis pop up on eBay because people bought them and weren't sure what to do. And this type of thing is likely to happen in a lot of cases, but you're still the end user. It's still you. The agent just exists wherever the assistant, the Siri, exists wherever you already own your devices, and that has to be the priority over, let's just go give you a massive CPU and a bunch of RAM and let the agent go have fun. That doesn't make sense. When am I going to use that stuff? I will. I don't know if anyone else will. And then it also has the benefit that if I put agent assistant AI on this, it also takes advantage of the same things I am.
I think consumer is also way more complicated from an agent perspective, right? Like piecing together 3 different apps to deliver something to you is not just the apps and the access to it, is monetarily how those apps are going to change, share revenue or,
Right.
What kind of permissions you have. It is a very complicated environment versus an enterprise environment.
Right. So I do want to touch on that. I think there was some, commentary we saw kind of come out in the internet spheres on expectations of an enterprise-ish thing, right? And I think that's built from because so much of AI today is in the enterprise, right? If you look at the vast majority of things that Anthropic and OpenAI are exceeding at, it's in enterprise, right, applications. And there's a lot of value to that, right? We talk about it as the control plane layer. There's something that you are prompting, collaborating with, and it's going and doing, right, these things for you. And that's going to exist in the enterprise forever, right? And maybe Apple has something there. But at the consumer side, it's a very different ballgame, right? But what I think is interesting is that the workflow philosophically is the same, right? What's in my email, summarize a conversation I'm having with somebody, right? Go help me find the picture of this. Like it's the same types of workflows, which still necessitate that control plane. It's just in this case, right, it's Siri, whether it's obvious that you're typing to it or talking to it, or it's doing these things on your behalf. It's the same concept, but it's 2 different audiences, right, executing in outcomes, right, consumer outcomes versus enterprise outcomes. So, what's the, I guess, way in which we differentiate those 2 things? And then, obviously, I think we all agree, like, it's going to be hard with what Apple did for the enterprise model labs to have consumer ambitions, but what about like the reverse, right? Does this bring any meaningful different opportunities for Apple even in enterprise?
I think it kind of does. If you look at the base core Gemini functionality that they're going to charge you, I think a lot of it's free, but some of it's still $10, $15, $20 a seat. Same for Copilot. It's what's in my email. It's help me write this. It's help me organize my calendar. These are like the core functionality, and then they charge you a little bit more on top for agents. If that's just included in the iPhone you already have or have seated for work, the iPad that your executives or employees already have. Well, for now buying new computers, why not just get a Mac? It's included. Maybe we spend, a couple of years ago, it was maybe we spend an extra couple hundred. Now it's maybe we save a couple hundred because they're not getting marked up.
Right.
And it's included with all this stuff. Like the way it writes emails and can adjust depending on the person you're responding to. That is, I would say that's probably a feature that you would see out of Google Cloud or Microsoft Office as a big deal from, like, this is why you should buy one of our agents.
Yeah.
I can see the same thing for taking notes or managing your calendar. This is the type of stuff that would.
Right.
And it's now included for free with the products you're already buying. I think that can help shift a lot of the hardware buying decisions, and then maybe services on top of that if you don't need to subscribe to certain ones.
I don't disagree with that. I think that fundamentally it will require a different thinking from an enterprise perspective, because Apple historically has never really pushed what used to be called iWork, right? It's just not something that people cared about and that Apple really wanted to, commercialize from an enterprise perspective. I do think, to your point, that what it does is provide more value to the hardware in an enterprise environment, and then from there, people might try and use different things. But even if you are still, like, say you're in a workspace environment, and like we are, right? And I can have all my emails into Mail instead of using Gmail. I have the kind of the best of both worlds, where I can see all my accounts in one place, using Apple Intelligence to do what I need to do. So making sure that my emails to Ben are very short, because it doesn't go past the first line usually. So just be direct and to the point. But that I think is more the opportunity that it still requires some IT managers to think differently about the services side.
Yep. Yeah, and I think there'll be an interesting question as to, assuming that it continues to become more capable, is there some of those privacy and trusted environments where an enterprise might be comfortable, right, letting Siri be the control plane for finding documents, right, summarizing emails, things like that, as they evolve. I'm not think it's not day one, but over time. But I think again, we come back to, like, these lines blur, right, fairly often, right? You use your personal device, your IT department's gonna let you have access, right, to those things, but yet there's crossover there, and that's where I sort of always wonder too, like, does there become a tension? Like, what if they're like, hey, we're going to license Anthropic, so you have to use that for all these things, but right, you're in a trusted environment with the iPhone, so.
But I think we're at the point where, as well, you see all the OEMs on the Windows side pushing their own solutions, right? From HP, you have HP IQ, you have Lenovo.
Right, that's true, yeah.
So that becomes then, my point I was thinking just now is like, maybe is a mute point, because Siri becomes yet another one that I choose. And so from an enterprise perspective, I either kill them all, by including those on the PC side, or I might be open.
Yeah.
The one thing I do wonder is, this is also getting lower level into Windows and Android and all the other operating systems. There's no native way to really share data between apps. That's just not a thing. You'd have to do it through the backend APIs. Then you need to build the MCP servers. Apple said app intents. They have app actions. This is just native in the operating systems across everything. Windows and Android don't have these. So even trying to do some of the stuff to get broader into the operating systems, it's difficult, if not impossible, in a lot of cases. And when you start having PC OEMs build their own solutions on top of Windows, you have 3 or 4 competing solutions, with Microsoft also working on their own. Windows updates may add it, Windows updates may not add it. It's just really complicated, and that's something Microsoft needs to figure out. And they will, once they do, I assume most enterprises would rather just wait than jump into the Apple ship to do it. But that is something that Apple now has figured out, and it seems to work extremely well. And maybe it takes Microsoft a few years, then add 2 years on top of that for IT to validate it. That's a long time for a lot of this. And I think they'd rather wait than jump ship to something else. But it's just, there's a lot to it. It's a lot more than just, we have a lot of solutions.
Yeah. So, all right, we're going to pivot to a section that we're sort of just loosely going to call Apple Intelligence AI 101. And we're going to have Max here explain what we learned in a little technical session with Craig Federighi on team, trying to understand what the collaboration with the Gemini families of models did and did not bring to Siri and Apple Intelligence.
Okay, a lot of it is not necessarily clear. Not every question was answered, but a lot of it was. The base of it is there are, I believe, 5 Apple foundational models now. Apple Foundation, AFM Core, AFM Core Advanced, AFM Server, AFM Server Image, and AFM Server Pro. Everything but AFM Server Pro is an Apple model. They were trained on the latest generation TPUs. It's Apple's architecture. They are fully Apple. All Google did was they used some synthetic data and likely a little bit of distillation to create those models and make them a little bit more intelligent. But they're Apple models. AFM Server Pro is, I believe, a Gemini-based model where then Apple takes their own data, pre-trains it a little bit more, and then does their own tuning on top of it to turn it into an Apple model. So it would be the equivalent of TSMC giving Apple the transistor design for a 2 nanometer node, 3 nanometer node, and then Apple turning that into a finalized A16 or an A19 Pro. And that's kind of how I think the best analogy to this is. Yes, it is a Google IP behind it. TSMC IP is behind the A19 Pro, but it's still an Apple product at the end of the day. And that 4 of them, not everything but, again, that AFM Server Pro runs on Apple Silicon. It's Apple Private Cloud Compute. Then AFM Server Pro is NVIDIA cards in Google Cloud. But the one thing that I thought was really interesting is Apple said they built the servers, they built the platform and all the networking for that. All Google Cloud is doing is hosting it.
Yeah.
And it runs with Intel and NVIDIA. So if someone were to breach one of them, the other's still secure. And that's just, it was a really interesting architecture. Then Siri, on top of that, they have it as an orchestration layer. So when you ask it a question, it sends that to the local model on your phone. That local model will then take your prompt, search for tools and data, rephrase that into a structured prompt to send to the server model. So the server model never gets your raw data. All it has access to is web search in the original prompt with the data that the on-device model sent. It can then answer that. If it needs to go back and ask the on-device model for more information, it can. And it does this back and forth handshake until the final response is done. And then it generates the voice to speak to you on your device. I think that's
That
it.
gave me a headache.
Okay, so what's intriguing though is all of that is true, but why did they want us to know this? Like, I kept sort of walking away with like, okay, we've never done something like this before. Like, it's rare that you go get like a technical deep dive, right, on some of the nitty gritty in both architectures and software. Obviously compute, and your point about Intel and NVIDIA is right, and the reason that's relevant is because both of them have confidential compute environments already into silicon, and so you're basically, what, 2 or 3 times, right, protected, because so does Apple with Secure Enclave. So, but why, like, why tell us and a whole slew other of the media
I
these
think there's
details?
2 reasons, in my opinion. One is that, how many times people said this morning, this is Gemini powered, and thinking that...
Actually, my best,
At least 30,000.
The best meme, which is incorrect in this view, was somebody doing the Fred and Scooby-Doo thing, where it's like the ghost is like, it's Siri, and then you pull it off, and it's Gemini. And it was like, and that's not true, but that was a funny meme.
And the other part, I think, is also important because some people were questioning what is Google seeing, right, from a data perspective. Right. And so there was a lot of attention talking about the privacy and security in that respect. And to your point, you know, how much they control the data that goes to the nodes. I think those were, in my opinion, the 2 reasons, especially coming out of Google I/O, where, you know, they said on stage, we're powering Siri.
Right, we knew it going in, yes.
I think a lot of it too was, there were some comments of, well, does this mean Siri's powered by Gemini Intelligence? We have this new Android thing. No, it's not. But it helps clarify that Apple is not behind in AI research to the extent a lot of people think. Their on-device model, the new one, the advanced one for A19 Pro and some of the other devices, is genuinely the most interesting and advanced on-device like model architecture there is. You're running a 20 billion parameter model on an iPhone with 12 gigabytes of memory. That is insanely cool. 1 to 4 billion are active, and it only loads in the parameters you need. that has never been a thing before. That is genuinely like an innovative model architecture that no one else has tried. They're not behind in sort of these optimizations and runtime and how to make it work. They just don't have the large foundational models that Google has. And that's fine. But I think this also helps show, we're not really behind. You just don't see, you don't see and understand it the same way because OpenAI and Anthropic are always posting benchmarks. Google's doing it and pushing really hard because they have to sell you the API and the services behind that to enterprises and other companies. Apple doesn't, so they don't really talk about it as much, but they still want you to understand.
Yeah, and this goes back to the point I made earlier about it is a different reason why Apple does AI versus the other players, right? But I think the other part is letting people know that Apple is in control of his own fate. Because I think that with the belief that this is all Google, there was that misunderstanding that they couldn't have done it without it. And then now they're totally dependent. And I don't think that I didn't walk out of that session thinking that is the case. Not that I did before, but it's pretty clear that they have talent in-house and that they are building their own AI.
Yeah. So I wonder if part of it also was, because they talked a lot about not just the security and privacy, but the confidential compute points, which I think matters to countries that they are going to try to bring this to, where you do need to have some very specific, because there's a lot of concern. Like, I don't think there's just some consumer concern about like trust in AI. I think there's nation concern, like there's national interests.
Yeah, sovereignty is the most spoken word.
Right, and I think that's why they're doing those things, so that when they go and do the proposals to the EU, right, which they talk about, can get over some of those burdens, because they are doing the things that check the boxes that they need for a number of these countries that are very, very cautious about bringing AI full scale into their nations for their people. And so I think this is part of a burgeoning story that they're trying to grow and push, because of that odd amount of, but rightfully so, geopolitical tension that's coming around AI.
I think one of the other ones that's huge is with owning our own fate in this case. I believe in China, if you want to train a model to have on devices like this, you need to train it in China. It cannot be brought, whatever.
Right.
Correct.
So that means those first 4 models that are Apple models, they can retrain those in China with Chinese data, and they can have those as part of Apple Intelligence running on device. But that larger Google Gemini model, they can't do that, which means you then need to take some of that model architecture IP they licensed and either adapt it to a large Chinese model or take one of those. And again, same style of, I would say, cursor with Moonshot and Kimi K2, where you take the model and then instead of Gemini, you use Kimi and try to turn that into your Server Pro model. But that's the only way then they can. China's the second largest market for Apple, maybe first, depending on the product line. But you need that to hit AI in that market. And that market also cares a lot about the data needs to be on device, the AI needs to be on device. We don't care in the US, but they do. So you need to own that fate to be able to hit that first, second largest market.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that just makes for an interesting, dynamic to this, about how, it's one of those. It's the first time this becomes kind of hard for a global rollout, because it's not just language translation.
Yeah.
Right. It is bringing a sophisticated technology that has a lot of nuance and stigma to it, right, to consumers in a way that they can, and it just makes for a very interesting, I think, global rollout that is more challenging, right, than times before. Despite all the value, there's just more hurdles, right, that have to get done, which, if anything, makes it super interesting, because how many companies other than Apple can actually go through and even make an attempt, right, to bring all of those features to those customers at a consumer level with their devices on a global footprint. So it just shows how hard globalization is with AI. I guess is kind of my broader point.
On the infra point, that's not even a bad thing. It gives them time to build out infrastructure in each country if they have their own silicon ready at some point to swap over from NVIDIA to that rumored Broadcom Apple AI chip, install them wherever. So it gives them more time to plan and control their own infrastructure layer on top of everything else, and find maybe other data center hosts or build their own.
Yeah. All right, so in the last few minutes, what are like one or two features you saw around Apple Intelligence that you're excited about?
I think all the features around the camera were interesting, just because they make for a better shot, but they keep the integrity of what I was trying to capture. So it wasn't gimmicky. I was really positively surprised by how much more useful Visual Playground is now. It really did not feel like a gimmick anymore. And I actually like the ability to customize the voices for Siri. And I know it seems trivial, but I do think, because I already picked my voice now, but having having somebody that you can relate to, and I speak as an example with Alexa, that now has different personalities. Alexa is very verbose because she is trying to be really nice to you. I can't stand that. I don't have enough time in my life to have Alexa be so nice to me, and I'm not used to people being nice to me. Having the ability to pick the voice that fits your personality, that fits your way, it just gives you, I know, like I can't use the word I want to use, but it just gets you to be more engaged. Right. And it's the same thing with, if you think about it, with the way that, you might chat with Claude, where it's like, don't just be nice to me, just, critique what I'm doing, be real. And I think that matters a lot to consumers.
Yeah. Agreed.
I've got two things. One of them is spatial reframing in photos. I love that. You can take the photo and change the perspective view, and it just fills in the background. Still the original photo, but you can adjust it around. And that's just really cool. I really like that one. And then the other one, I think it's the Siri app on my watch, for like a proper Siri that can then go into my phone and start doing things from my Apple Watch. I love just lifting it up and speaking to it when I'm not trying to do anything. That gets into the territory of like, is this AI hardware now? If I can control everything from my phone, from my watch, and don't have to think about it. You add 5G with the watches now, you don't need your phone on you. You're getting into that territory of, okay, I can kind of see where this may go in the future.
Mine's going to hand down be search, because I am unfortunately a very unorganized person, as Max knows from my desktop images. But not just search. I mean, just to be able to be like, somebody sent me something, 2 weeks ago. Like, what was that? What was in that one report? That one thing I do remember. But the context and maybe semantic search getting better, right, with Siri, so that it can have much better context search within
better
the app.
Searching pictures. Yes.
Well, but not just the pictures. Like, I think, yes. So all right. So pictures is actually a good example for what I think becomes broadly, because you could just say like, bear Tahoe. And that works today, right? Ish. But you can't do that with anything else. I can't go, what was that one report on Broadcom Max sent me 3 weeks ago? It's a pain to find, if ever, right? It's just a void of unstructured data. And so the fact that might work is very exciting to me. So that will search, semantic search, and then like Siri and whatnot in that could change Ben's life of device usage, of unorganized, unstructured amounts of data and information. So I'm excited about that. So we'll see. We are YOLOing the software. I don't know if Carolina is, but Max and I have it on our primary devices already, and will so with others. So we will be actively trying all of these things and see what works in the coming days.
I'm sensible, so I'm going to wait till I'm
She's
home.
the wise one, to be honest with you.
Destroy our phones with it.
Wisdom of Carolina, where we're just kind of like, throw caution to the wind. I don't care. All right. Well, we appreciate everybody listening. It's been a great dub. We look forward to next year, and we will talk to you next time.